This is a gem in the scripture canon. The Epistle of James is one of my favorites because it's so unique on so many levels. If you're ever needing to give a spiritual thought in a meeting, you can pretty much turn to the Epistle of James, randomly put your finger down and start reading. It's kind of the Proverbs of the New Testament. It's just a whole bunch of really, really inspired sayings, and in some cases, one-liners that are just, they're power-packed. And before we dive into any of the actual verses, let's give some background here. Who is James? Tradition holds that this particular James, who wrote this letter, is not the brother of John, the two sons of Zebedee, some of the original apostles of Jesus, James and John, that worked with Peter, but rather this James, Christian tradition holds, is the half-brother of Jesus.
That's really makes it super exciting. We are listening to somebody who grew up with Jesus and would have known him intimately. And when I look at this, I think, am I hearing more of a family gospel lesson that Jesus may have been teaching his own brothers?
Which is fascinating because we know from the book of the Acts that none of Jesus's brothers believed in his divinity during his ministry, during his lifetime. It's only after his resurrection that there are some powerful experiences had by James and probably Jude, one of the other half-brothers, that actually turn the corner for them as far as their conversion is concerned. And then James, this half-brother, after this conversion, goes to Jerusalem, and he very quickly becomes the leader of the group of Christian saints in Jerusalem, the capital city. He becomes kind of the head of what we've termed in previous episodes as the Judaizers. James is kind of the leader of that group. So these are Jewish Christians living in Jerusalem who are being persecuted by the leaders of the Jewish faith at that time, the chief priests, the Sanhedrin, that also tried Jesus. They're going to bring these Jewish Christians under intense persecution. Remember, Stephen was stoned under the direction of the leaders of the Jews, and all those persecutions going out with Saul, who then became Paul. That's all directed by the leaders of the Jews against this group that they see as a breakoff. And now James, incidentally, what is his name in Greek?
Yeah, it's Yaakov or Jacob.
So now let's set the stage for trying to better understand the words. If we understand the context, then the content in the Epistle of James will probably make a little more sense to you. Knowing that he is the leader of this group that we have termed the Judaizers, keep in mind, this is the group that would go out into the diaspora, into the Greco-Roman world of the Mediterranean region. And they would tell Gentile Christians that they needed to live the law of Moses more fully and completely to be a true Christian, that they would need to kind of be proselytes to the Jewish traditions first. And so Paul has been pushing against a lot of this influence. Well, now you come to this epistle, and you're going to see that it pushes in a slightly different direction, a very predictable but different direction than what Paul has been pushing at first glance. But if you look at it in its bigger context, you realize, oh, wait a minute. This isn't a competition between James and Paul. They're not teaching different gospels. They're not fighting doctrinally. They're not having a Bible bash. You can see how, in their context, they're both teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to slightly different audiences for slightly different reasons to solve slightly different problems or address different concerns. So let's be careful that we don't say, okay, now you have to pick either Paul or James. It's beautiful in the gospel when you can see how, even though at first it may seem to be mutually exclusive, true doctrines of the gospel are not mutually exclusive. It just means if they feel like that, it means we haven't paid the price yet to see how they are complementary doctrines. Because the more time we spend in the scriptures reading all of them and trying to understand them in their historical setting as well as their modern day relevance, then you see how they come together, which is exactly the case here. Now, keep in mind, it was Martin Luther who was this great reformer, and we love what he did. But keep in mind, he's the one who said anything associated with anything at all that I need to do, he would reject it out of hand. Consequently, when he comes to the Epistle of James, he calls it an epistle of straw. He says it's not scriptural, it doesn't belong in the Bible. He hated this book. Why? Because this book is filled with things that we need to be doing as disciples of Christ, and he was distancing himself from any doctrine associated with anything that we do to move along any kind of a covenant path.